Hey guys, I'm Ariadne and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my May wrap-up. So in the month of May, I read 16 books and I had 1 DNF, and of those 16, 9 of them were fantasy, 5 were romance, 1 was a sci-fi, and 1 was a mystery thriller. And May was definitely my best reading month because I had quite a few 5-star books. So like, am I a 5-star strumpet? Like maybe? Like percentage of the month, it was like less than half. So it's not like I rated everything 5 stars, but I don't usually have this many 5 stars in one month. And I started out the month with 4 5 stars. So we started out and I was like, am I just rating things easier, or I'm just like really hitting a roll with what I'm reading this month. So my overall average rating this month was a 4.06, which is definitely the highest I think it's ever been. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this in order of my least liked to liked. And so my least liked was the DNF. So my DNF was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. So this is a novella that follows a gang of bandits who end up with this votary of the Order of the Pure Moon, kind of tagging along on their adventures as they're going to go on this, like, they have this quest, I guess, that they're going on. And the fact that this was a novella and I DNF'd it, like, you'd think something so short I could just push through, but it was less than 200 pages, and I've been reading it for 2 days, and I just hadn't gotten very far into it. And because it was not for a lack of reading time, it was just I just never wanted to pick it up. Like, the first chapter was really good. It was very high action kind of standoff in like this coffee shop, and I was into it. And then from there, it just failed to interest me past that one chapter. Like, I never really was interested in the story. I couldn't tell the characters apart very well. Like, I kept forgetting who was who, other than like the main two. The rest of the bandit gang, I was just like, who's who? I just like couldn't keep them straight, and I just like wasn't very interested. It just didn't. I was bored, and so I just you know, I was like, it's 2 days, haven't gotten halfway through, plenty of reading time. We're just gonna stop. So unfortunately, that was the end. And now, going into books that I actually finished. So the only 2-star I read in the month was American Royalty by Tracy Livesay, and this was a bummer. So this is an arc I got. I'm always bummed when I like get an arc for something and don't like it, because I try to like request things I think I'm gonna like, right? And then I'm like, well, I feel bad giving, you know, early review a bad review, but you know, if I don't like it, I don't like it. So this was an adult contemporary romance that's kind of inspired by Meghan and Harry. The story itself is a different story, but it has the same general setup of English prince falling for famous American, and interracial romance. And from there, the story is different. Our American character, her name is Duchess, and she is a really successful American rapper. And I've seen some reviews who say her character seems to be inspired by Megan Thee Stallion. I don't know anything about rappers, so I don't know how true that is, but we're gonna throw it out there in case you know anything about rappers. But the problem with this book was, so the premise is Duchess ends up being asked to perform at a benefit concert that the royal family is hosting, and she gets there early and ends up, in order to like get some like time away from like the paparazzi and stuff, she ends up staying on one of the royal family's kind of like non-London estates, which is where the prince lives primarily, kind of in another village. And so they end up cohabitating in this kind of manor together, and so they kind of run into each other a bunch while they're there, and that's kind of how they, you know, hang out and kind of fall in love or whatever. But the problem I had was there was just no chemistry between them, like, at all. They spent a lot of time lusting after each other in their inner monologues, and none of that translated into actual chemistry between them when they were like actually interacting or talking to each other at all. And like, not even a little bit. Like, I thought that just had better chemistry with the side character, who was like another singer that the media was like, oh, are they together? Kind of speculation. I was like, dang, but they actually have some good chemistry. I kind of want them to be together. Then I did it with the prince. And then the other thing was, I completely did not believe their love story at all. Like, I could believe they had like a fun fling while they were at this manor house, because, you know, I mean, you don't really have to have a ton of romantic chemistry to have a fun fling. Kind of just, you know, the sexual chemistry while they're there. But I had absolutely no belief that their relationship would last past those 2 weeks of fling at this manor house. Because part of it, because they vilified the author vilified the royal family, which was to the extent vilified because they were against this relationship. And so they vilified them kind of to the extent that like they were all just these cartoonish caricatures of a personality trait. And because they were so mean and like so against this relationship, that at no point, even after like the turning point where they were like going to be together, did I ever believe this relationship was going to last with the royal family there, because like, there's just no way. Like, they were so mean, and they were just, like, not coming back from that. So, I did not believe in the longevity of the relationship either, so just, like, not a great one. I did like both of the characters individually, and I like there's a side story about Duchess's just this healthcare, this skincare brand she was trying to, that she was the CEO of and trying to like get bigger deals for, and I was rooting for her there. Although we didn't really get a resolution on that storyline either, which was a bummer. So there's a couple good things in it. There was this one specific Great British Bake Off inspired scene that I loved as like an individual scene, but overall just didn't really click with this book, which is unfortunate. Okay, next we have my 3-star reads, the first of which was The Girl from Shadow Springs by Ellie Cypher. This is a young adult standalone kind of fantasy western, and I was pretty into it at first. Like, we kind of started out in this like Iceland, like this ice cold setting, as opposed to like a desert setting for a western, so it's kind of like an ice western, I guess. And our main character ends up going off on this kind of survival quest to get tracked out and rescue her kidnapped sister, and she ends up bringing along this guy she meets in town that's connected to the kidnapping, not in a bad way. He's not the villain, but like he's connected to it too, and they kind of go off. And I really enjoyed it at first. It's kind of like survival adventuring story, but kind of towards the end, the story morphed into more supernatural, kind of all of a sudden, and kind of very like smushed at the end. It's just like all of a sudden got like very supernatural. I just like wasn't into it. I was here for like the ice adventuring story, and then just kind of like switched, and I'm just like, this is not the book I was reading though. So it was just fine. Yeah, it was just fine. I really liked the western part, and I want to read more like that part of the book. Next was The Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin, and this one was also just okay. I think I'm not a huge contemporary fantasy person in general, but this was a book club book for book clubbing in, so I picked it up. And I really like some things about it. So in this world, we take place in our world, and the witches all have weather powers, and they're the ones kind of keeping weather and climate in check, but they can only do so much when non-witchy humans are bad. You know, it feels very, very poignant to today's times. And in this book, we follow Clara, who is an Everwitch, which means she has the powers to do all of the seasons, and most witches are usually just they get one season. Like Everwitches are really rare, like once in 100 years kind of thing. And the climate situation is such that they need the power of the Everwitch is the only way they have any chance of like doing anything to help. And so I really liked the witch and magic in this, like the witchiness and magic in this. I thought the season, like it was more than just you had the power of a season. I like how you also, it's like when it wasn't your season, your power was affected, like it was weaker, and also kind of your mood and personalities were affected when you were off season. And I really thought it was interesting how Clara, as the Everwitch who can do all of the seasons, still had kind of mood changes with the season. I thought that was kind of interesting too. I like that part of it. Clara's story here is that she is kind of traumatized because she is accidentally killed several people with her magic because she doesn't quite have it under control. And I enjoyed her journey to overcome that and kind of work through it, kind of learn how to do her magic. But what I really didn't like, and this is kind of why I ended up being a 3-star, was I did not like Clara because in my mind, the stakes of like the climate was so big. It was such a huge stakes, like very high stakes. And I did not expect her to just all of a sudden be able to like move past her trauma and like save the world. Obviously that's unrealistic. But I did expect her to want to like care, like even a little bit about the stakes. But she genuinely didn't care at all about these high stakes. She seemed to have no care at all that like the world might end kind of thing. Like she needed to work through her trauma. It wasn't going to be an overnight solution, but I wanted her to like at least want to try to help. Like I understand she was scared. That's completely understandable, but she was scared and thus didn't care and didn't want to help. I just like needed her to want to help. I needed her to be like, I would like to help, but I don't know how because I'm traumatized and scared. And she just like didn't care. And thus I was mad at her like the whole book. I was like, care about something. And she gets called out a couple times by like a side character, and I really wish that side character had more page time because that side character was great. She called her out on all of her bullshit, and I was like, I'm here for you, Paige. I need you to hear more. Okay, next 3-star, and the last 3-star was Gild by Raven Kennedy. So before I say my thoughts on it, I'd like to say this series is billed as a fantasy romance, which I think is correct, but don't be fooled. This first book has no romance at all. Not even a little bit. Literally no romance. So if you're going into the first book, don't expect the romance yet. I've heard some people kind of call this first book almost a prologue, kind of set up some of like the character like work, like backgrounds going into the other books where you have the romance storyline. So I was a little disappointed because I was picking it up because I kind of wanted the romance part of the fantasy romance, and I didn't get that. But I had a fine time with this. I don't even know how to describe how I felt about it because I didn't love it. I didn't dislike it either. I kind of just read it, and it existed. There are some things in it I didn't like. There's entirely too much sexual assault on page in this. I didn't enjoy reading at all. And then there was the main character, Oren, who's kind of the gold-plated girl. What is this about? This is a King Midas inspired fantasy romance where King Midas has turned everything to gold, including our main character, who's now gold-plated, and she's the king's preferred harem member. They call them saddles in the book, which is odd. But so yeah, and she has this thing where she has these gold ribbons that grow out of her back, and she can control them and move them, and it really creeped me out. I hated that part so much. But this book was so readable. It was so readable. I just couldn't put it down, even though I don't even have a thing about it that I really liked. So I'm intrigued enough to read the second one. I have a Kindle Unlimited free trial right now, and these are on Kindle Unlimited. If I didn't, I probably would not care enough to go track down the second one, but it's right there. I think I'm going to give the second one a shot. Presumably the romance comes out in the second one, and we'll see if I enjoy it with that, if I want to finish the series. But I am intrigued by, so I think the romantic interest was introduced at the end of the first book, and I am intrigued as to where this dynamic could go. So we'll see how I feel about the second one. Okay, moving on to my 4 stars. First was Ice Planet Barbarians by Dixon. I have a reading vlog where I talk about this if you want to see more thoughts, but the short version is I expected kind of cheesy camp sci-fi, and I got cheesy camp sci-fi, and it was a fun time. Okay, next was a reread for me, and that was Unsold by Shusterman. This is the 3rd book in the Unwind Dystology series, and this is definitely, I think, my least favorite of the first 3 so far, primarily because this is very clearly a setup book into the 4th one, which just isn't quite as hooking as the first 2 were. It was a little bit slower, but it was still good. I'm definitely intrigued to see how all of the tendrils kind of work themselves out, because this is the last book of the series that I had originally read, so the 4th one will be a first time read, not a reread anymore, so I don't know where it's going to go. So I'm excited to see how everything that was set up in this one is going to go. The one thing I didn't like about this one, though, was it added a couple new point of views, which they were just characters I didn't want to be in the head of. I understand what it was doing with kind of expanding some of the stories in the world, but I just did not want to be in the head of these characters, because there was kind of villainous characters that just didn't want to be there. So didn't love those point of view expansions, but other than that, still a very, very solid kind of sci-fi dystopian series. Next, I read 12 Kings and Cherokai by Bradley P. Beaulieu. And so this is the first in a 6-book series, and in this one we are set in this desert kingdom ruled by 12 kings who are all seated in the city of Sharakhai, and they have this this band of blade maidens who are their protectors, and they have these kind of holy defenders called the Asirim, and they in this story we follow Cheta, who is just kind of a poor girl. She's she does fighting in the fighting rings, and she kind of lives in kind of the slums, kind of that kind of character, and she accidentally sees something on the holy night that she's not supposed to see. You're supposed to stay home during the holy night, but she ends up going out because of this running job she has to do, this delivery job, and she sees something she's not supposed to see, and it kind of follows her and how she kind of reacts and what she does with this information, as well as kind of her own personal revenge story against the kings for killing her mother. And we get a lot of flashbacks in this book with Cheta's backstory, and I really like the flashbacks and kind of how they were inserted throughout the story, kind of filling out her backstory and her motivations as we went. I also really enjoyed the setting. I realized I really like desert setting fantasy, so that really worked for me. I'm very, very intrigued kind of by the city and a lot of the kind of lore and stuff they've set up in this book. I read this as part of a buddy read, and the one thing that really turned off someone else in this buddy read, was how overly descriptive it was. And so I agree that this had a lot of descriptions, and 90% of the time it didn't bother me. 90% of the time I just enjoyed fleshing out a lot of this vivid imagery of where we were. But I will say, by the time I got to the end, I kind of was so this is a kind of long book. I think it's 600 something pages, maybe right around. And by the time I got to the end, I was for the amount of plot that actually happens in this book, this didn't need to be 600 pages. You probably could have trimmed some of that description. It was a little bloated. Most of the time it was fine because I did generally enjoy it, but you definitely could have trimmed it to be a little bit less bloated for the amount of stuff that actually happens in it. So that's kind of my main critique. It was kind of getting the end. I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty long for how much has happened. But I did enjoy it. I'm definitely going to continue on in this series. Okay, next I read Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So really, this should have just been called Phaedra, because Phaedra was the star of this book for me. So this is a retelling of Ariadne's story of Greek myth. And I say retelling in quotes because I think calling it a retelling is incorrect. Like, I feel like that is a misleading label for this book, because in my mind, a retelling adds or changes something to the original story, whether it's like a different setting, like, you know, taking the story and putting it in modern times, gender bending characters, changing something about the story, like doing like a what if this decision was made instead of that decision kind of thing. And this one really didn't change anything of the story from what I could tell, doing some, like, you know, Wikipedia reading after reading it. The story was the same. The only thing that was different was it was told from the point of view of Ariadne and Phaedra instead of kind of like maybe an omniscient third person or like through Theseus's eyes. And I just don't think that didn't like add anything to the actual story. Like, I don't know, it had some additional commentary kind of in their thoughts about kind of maybe the plight of women and myths, but their story was the same. So I feel like calling it a retelling communicates something about it that's not true. That's just my opinion. I still enjoyed this. Like, this is a 4-star book for me. But all that to say, I think as a disclaimer, I think if you're someone who's like really, really into Greek mythology, you know all your Greek mythology, you're subject matter expert Greek mythology, this might not be a good book for you because it's not going to give you anything new. You're just going to be rereading a story you already know. And if you want to do that, go for it. But just have the right expectations. For someone like me who is somewhat familiar with some Greek mythologies but isn't like expert, I really enjoyed it because I knew the story of Ariadne and Theseus and the Minotaur, but I didn't know anything of her story after that. So once we got past that story, it was all new story to me, and Jennifer Saint wrote it very well, so I really enjoyed it for that. I did think Ariadne's story got a little ho-hum in the middle when she was on the island, and I much more enjoyed Phaedra's chapters during that part of the story, so I'm really glad Phaedra had point of views. I wasn't expecting that, because I hadn't read the blurb. I just kind of heard it talked about as an Ariadne retelling. So I really loved Phaedra's chapters. Ariadne's story did get a little bit more exciting kind of towards the end, and overall I definitely really enjoyed this. And I'm definitely excited to pick up her next book because it's also another it's called Electra, and it's like about other mythological characters that I don't know much about. So even if she doesn't really change much of the story, like in this one, I'll still enjoy it because it's a new story to me. Okay, next I read The Hunting Wives by Cobb. This is a mystery thriller about a woman who moves from the big city life in Chicago to a small town in Texas that she lived in for a few years when she was growing up. And she goes from having this high-powered job to being a stay-at-home mom. And so she ends up falling into this kind of friendship with like the popular clique of women in the town, and they call themselves the Hunting Wives. And their big thing that they do is like once a week they do this secret target practice out on one of the women's kind of second lake property with shotguns, and they shoot skeet. So she kind of falls in line with them, and then one night there is a dead body found like the next day on that woman's property, and it seemed to have been killed or left there at the same time that they would have been out shooting. So this then follows kind of the unraveling of that story. And wow, when I tell you, this had the single most unlikable cast of characters I think I've ever read. Like, I like unlikable characters in mystery thrillers, so that wasn't necessarily a detractor, but I did start this book and I was just like, oh my god, all of you are the worst. Like, it was like to the next degree of unlikable from what I usually have seen in mystery thrillers. They all made horrible decisions, a lot, from like horrible for lots of reasons, but dang, was this book just not, it was unputdownable. I devoured this. I think I read like 80% of it sitting in the Starbucks at my local Barnes Noble one day, and then I had to go home and like finish it later that night. It was very, very gripping. I was kind of uncomfortable with a couple things in it. Primarily, there was one character of an adult age, like adult, like the women, the moms, adult, having a relationship with a minor, and that made me very uncomfortable to read about. Yeah, so just warning, if that's gonna be too uncomfortable for you to read, it's not necessarily something that's like constituted as the right thing to be doing. Like, it's definitely like not written as an endorsement, but it was still definitely made me physically comfortable to read out that part, and that's kind of one of the main reasons this wasn't a 5-star, honestly, was because it made me so uncomfortable. The other thing too was when our main character kind of starts doing her own independent sleuthing, and she would like call the police guy and tell him what she was doing, and he was just like too cool with it. Like, he was just like, yeah, just keep doing. I'm like, why are you encouraging this? Like, this isn't a cozy mystery. I don't know. That's like my main hang up with cozy mysteries too, is a lot of the individual sleuthing depending on how it's written. And this one I was just like, this guy's going a little too easy. So other than that though, I definitely recommend this. I had a really good time with it, and I'm definitely going to read this author's newest book that came out, I think, earlier this year. Next, I read Beauty by Robin McKinley. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and this one, from what I could see from, so I'm more familiar with the Disney movie Beauty and the Beast story, but I did look up the original, like, La Belle and la Bête story, and this one sticks fairly close to it. It makes some tweaks here and there, some little changes, that I think really did a good job of kind of like transforming the fairy tale into a really well done, like, little fantasy book fairy tale versus like true fairy tale, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way to say what I'm trying to say, but yeah, I thought this was an enjoyable read. I really liked how present Beauty's family was in this, because in this one and in the original, Beauty has other siblings, and it's not just her and her dad like it is in the Disney movie. And I really enjoyed it. This was just like a really delightful little read to kind of end my month with, because I think this was one of the last books I read in the month. So yeah, it was nice. Okay, now we're getting to my 6 5-star books of the month, and the first of those is Made in Manhattan by Lauren Layne. This is an adult contemporary romance, and it is a gender-bent My Fair Lady retelling following Violet, who's a Manhattan socialite, and Kane, who's kind of this rough around the edges guy from the Bayou down in Louisiana. And in the story, Kane discovers he has his long-lost grandmother that he never knew about, and the grandmother, never knew about him, because her son dies, and that's when it kind of comes out that the son had a son that she had no idea existed, and she wants to groom this grandson, Kane, into being fit to take over as CEO of the family company. And so Violet is enlisted by the grandmother because they're buds. She enlisted Violet's help to kind of like whip him into shape to kind of fit in the Manhattan, like, upper echelon social scene, to be able to kind of fit in personality-wise. And so I really love this book. I loved the banter between the two characters. I thought they had really, really good chemistry. I love the way they kind of brought out the best in each other. Just kind of like bringing them out of their shells a little bit, kind of a little like pieces of each other's world into each other's world. And yeah, I just loved it. It also felt like reading this gave me the same feeling that I would get when I like rewatch favorite rom-coms, like true like movie theater, like theater released rom-coms, not just like little Hallmark movie ones. Like, it just gave me the same feeling I got when I would like watch those kinds of big release rom-coms, and so I really loved it. It was great. This was my first Lauren Layne book, and I know she had one out last year that I was interested in too, so I definitely think I'm going to try and pick up more by her. Next, I read The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. I have a review for this, so I will link that for my full thoughts, but the short version is I loved this book so much. It's a desert fantasy story inspired, and it uses elements of the 1001 Nights story. It's not a retelling of any one story, but it's inspired by that, and I really loved it. It's the first in a adult fantasy trilogy coming out, and I'm very excited for the next one to come out, hopefully next year. I don't know. Next is A Matter of Class by Mary Balogh. This is a historical romance novella, and there's not much I can say about this one because it's so short. I don't want to just like spoil everything that happens in it, especially since kind of one of the reason this became a 5-star instead of 4-star was a very specific thing the author does in it, and I don't want to spoil that. The short version is we have Reginald, who is the son of a wealthy parents, but they are not titled. They just earned their wealth through, I guess, business, and they are neighbors to an earl, and they've been enemies for like 30 years because the earl doesn't like accept the wealthy family because they're not titled, and the wealthy family wants to be accepted, so they've been at odds. And then they find out that the earl's daughter has been disgraced, and now no one is going to marry her, and they want to get Reginald a title so that he can be titled. And so the wealthy dad is like, well, let's set up the kids here to marry because it'll be like a big FU to the Earl, because now my son is the only one who would deign to marry his daughter after the disgrace, so haha, and we'll get a title out of it, kind of set up kind of an arranged marriage, and it was great. It was great. Definitely want to read more by Mary Balogh now, because this was my first by her. Next, I read The Lady Tempts and Heir by Harper St. George, another adult historical romance. This is the third book in the Gilded Age Heiresses series, and this entire series has been 5 stars for me. I've adored every entry in the series. This one follows Maxwell, the brother of the 2 female leads from the first 2 books, and he wants to court someone, be engaged to kind of get his father off his back, because his father wants him to get married. And then so he enters into a fake engagement, fake courting with Helena, who is a widow, and she has been kind of championing this home for single mothers and women and widowed women in London, and she realizes she needs a fiance because people are taking her less seriously now that she's widowed and there's no man. And so she needs this fiance so that people will start taking her cause seriously and start donating to the house again, because it's kind of uncouth otherwise. So they enter this fake engagement, and I loved it. They knew each other somewhat previously to this book through the sisters, because she is friends with his sisters, and they just have this, like, from the get-go, just have this excellent chemistry and this, like, deep mutual pining, and I loved it. Watching the fake engagement play out when they're both just sitting there pining from the get-go, like, it wasn't even like they enter fake engagement and slowly fall for each other. They were already there. It was great. And then this book also deals with infertility, and I thought it did a really good job dealing with it. I've read some romance books, cough, The Friend Zone, cough, that does a really bad job with dealing with it. So I guess slight spoiler, there is no magic pregnancy in this one after all the talk of infertility, which was great. Definitely glad she did not ruin that plot line. They're throwing a magic baby in the end, like other books have done. So yeah, I love this one. I can't wait for the 4th book to come out. Next, I read Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence. This is the 2nd book in the Book of the Ancestors series, and wow, was this a step up from Red Sister. I was kind of on the fence after Red Sister for why I wanted to continue the series. I was like, I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I didn't know if I wanted to continue just because so many other series to read and stuff, but I decided to continue. I'd heard got better, so I was like, you know what, we'll give it a shot, and I loved this one, so I'm very glad I did. I think part of it is Nona is no longer 9, and I think Nona as a slightly older teenager, just like I enjoyed better as a narrator than I did in the first book when she's like a kid. I think it just worked better for me. I also just found the plot and like the story of this one it was just much more engrossing, and I just loved it. We have some new point of views in this one that I love, some other point of views. Abbess Glass has a point of view in this one, and I loved her chapters. I just loved everything that was happening in this one, and the ending was fantastic. So I'm now very excited to read the last book in the series. And then the last 5-star in this wrap-up is The House of Always by Jenn Lyons, the 4th book in the Chorus of Dragons series. This is the 1st book in the series I'm giving 5 stars. It's my favorite of the 4 I've read so far. So this one, the time jumping and point of view switching that she is known for in this series is the least confusing, and also it's on paper what should be the most confusing. And I really liked it. I really liked what she was doing with the point of view and time switching in this one, like, without, like, spoiling everything that's happening in this book. It was just, like, the reason it was, there was a very clear reason why we were jumping so much in this one, other than just for funsies. Like, there was a clear plot reason, and I thought it was really intriguing, and I really enjoyed it. This one, we are primarily stuck with our characters in one spot. They're kind of all holed up together in this lighthouse. So there's not much action kind of as far as going a lot of places, but I really liked spending that time with these characters. Before this book, I would say I liked a lot of so there's like the top tier main characters, and there's like the main character gang of comrades. And I would say before this, the main character gang I liked, but didn't necessarily love all of them. But I left this book feeling so much more attached to so many more of kind of the secondary main characters, which was a great job on her for doing that. I think that was a really good thing to do in this book, which also means I'm assuming that she is going to break my heart into a million pieces in the 5th one, because why else would she spend the 4th book really cementing that emotional tie right before the finale of a series, if not to make their deaths more painful? That's just what I'm assuming. We're just preparing now. But yeah, I really love that. And yeah, I'm, I guess, excited and emotionally nervous to read the 5th one. So that's my wrap up for the month of May. Let me know if you've read these, what you think, or what things you love reading in May, and I will see you in my next video.